Thank you all so much for joining me this afternoon. It's so lovely to see so many familiar and unfamiliar faces here. I am distinctly honored to be presenting the final program associated with Designing Motherhood at Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. This traveling exhibition is now in its 5th iteration. It's traveled now globally, and we are so honored to be showing it in its first iteration in the southern United States, and we've extended the checklist to really mine and investigate the intersections with contemporary craft. So come on in. If you need more seats, there's seats over here. A little bit of housekeeping. We do have restrooms across from the front desk, and I welcome feedback, questions. I want this to be kind of an intuitive lecture. So, why Houston Center for Contemporary Craft for Designing Motherhood? That is the question that I've been posed with the most since this show has opened. And what I really wanted to posit, more than showcasing all of the attendant material culture objects that are handcrafted, that intersect with reproductive experiences, was to also posit that caregiving and motherhood practices in and of themselves are analogs for craft disciplines. So, to start this argument, I hope this is kind of a provocative question. I want us to all think about this together. First, we have to define what craft is. So craft is, for me, is this lens to examine creative output, and it really encompasses all of these skilled making practices that pay particular attention to process, ancestral wisdom, material intelligence, and haptic learning. Really, learning by doing is central to craft. So processes like tending a 2,000-degree ceramic firing or warping an immensely complicated floor loom, all of these kinds of traditional craft disciplines, they tend to be very time and labor intensive. They're slow, and they necessitate community collaboration and technical knowledge that is intergenerational and really communal. So let's start there, and I'm going to go through how both craft and motherhood kind of share these properties. I'm going to break it up. They kind of bleed into each other, but skill sharing, labor, time and tracking, material intelligence, and the collective. So, skill sharing. I'm starting with this image of Annie Albers and a student from Black Mountain College. Each craft discipline, and I think uniquely craft, has this practice of apprenticeship. We have craft schools that are designed in a very distinct way from kind of fine arts programs. And it's really important to the way that craft practices are passed down. These kind of lineages of making are really important to the discipline. Black Mountain College was, of course, this really important center. Many emigres from Bauhaus kind of moved to Western North Carolina during the war, and really implemented some of these time process intensive programs that really prioritized process and apprenticeship. I love this quote from Jenny Sorkin, who wrote a book about Marguerite Wildenheim and many other kind of female makers around Black Mountain College. And she talks about craft as a performative gesture of collective skill. And what I want us to kind of think about is craftsmanship as this accretion of ancestral wisdom and material knowledge, embodied knowledge, that is learned and honed and developed each generation after one another. So these photographs, which were taken by Otto Hegel for Life magazine, I love the one on the left. It's documenting Marguerite at Pond Farm, which is also kind of around Black Mountain College. She was one of those Bauhaus ceramic professors. She was a sculptor, came from Germany. And what was so important about the way she administered and taught craft was that she made all of her students throw ceramic vessel upon ceramic vessel upon ceramic vessel, thousands of pots, and they didn't get to keep any of them. They got to slice them in half, see how even the wall forms were, really just train their hands. And so I think this image on the left, where you're just seeing this kind of compilation of hands and gestures, all of those kinds of skilled gestures that we need to perfect and hone a craft, that's what's important. It's process over the product. And that kind of human scaffolding, I think, is really important when we're talking about caregiving. I love this still from Weaning Fountain by Sarah Hubbs, which is in the exhibition. And we talk a lot about, it takes a village to raise kids, and it really does. And I think a lot of the documentation of caregiving practices, you really notice this holding of one another, this kind of tenderness and the gestures of care that are kind of reaching out into the frames. I'm putting my own birthing portrait from my mom's doula here on the left, but also Heiji Shin's kind of crowning series of images on the right. I think kind of the holding, the carrying, the ushering one generation into another is so central to both of these disciplines, right? Here we have stills from Maggie Shannon's Extreme Pain, Extreme Joy, which we launched here during the exhibition. These are portraits of midwives doing home births during COVID around Los Angeles. And again, just the gestures, all of the hands in the frame that are kind of carrying the weight one generation to the next, supporting one another, that kind of communal support and really that kind of apprenticeship is so singular to both of these things that we're talking about today. So I want to talk about Mothercraft. Mothercraft is, are any of you fans of Call the Midwives? Yes, okay. So in Call the Midwives, they talk a lot about Mothercraft. They teach Mothercraft courses. And this term was developed by a midwife in the mid-20s named Mabel Ladard. And her premise was that she needed to create a manual for being a parent, for motherhood. Everything from, proper delivery to how to fold diapers, how to properly wash and sanitize, how to cradle children, how to mend ripped clothing, how to sew kind of maternity patches into clothing. All of that was kind of vested into this document called the Mothercraft Manual. And you can see here, this is a still from a Mothercraft course. She's showing how to fold a cloth diaper and then how to scrub the stains away. And it really goes, I think, this kind of didactic emphasis on one generation stewarding the knowledge and kind of wisdom of another generation is really central here. So we have a still of one section of the show here, midwives, where we're showing a rebozo, which is from the Yucatan region, but really common in South and Central America, comes from these really rich weaving traditions. And this is a textile object that not only holds, cradles, acts as a blanket, but it is also this kind of active delivery device. It's also this tool used in labor and delivery and preparation. And then below that, we have an obstetric model that is also a soft sculpture. And many of these were handmade and continue to be handmade by midwives to teach other midwives how to properly and safely give birth. The first one we know about is from the 16th century on the right. This is The Birthing Machine by Madame de Coudray, 16th century French midwife who really transformed the entire discipline of midwifery at the time. She built this sculpture by hand. I think to kind of our modern eyes, it looks very like Klaus Oldenburg soft sculpture. But it was made of human bones, padding, batting, linen. And she used this to teach other midwives how to safely deliver babies, and it lowered the infant and maternal mortality rate in Europe at that time so drastically that they started putting these into production. So again, a handmade object that's really stewarding this kind of didactic intergenerational knowledge sharing. On the top left, we see a lactation puppet. These are hand crocheted by lactation consultants and doulas. And what's amazing about them is that they are often customized for their clients. So the lactation client, if they have an inverted nipple or if their children has a tongue tie, something like that, they can actually craft that into the lactation puppet and show how to accommodate those kinds of challenges. And again, it's something that, what Mabel was saying in the Mothercraft manual is that it seems like it's an inherent form of knowledge that we just kind of are birthed into, and we should just innately understand how to do things like breastfeed or, safely, properly clothe, change children. All of these kinds of elements of caregiving are actually, require skill share, honing, kind of customization, similar to craft disciplines. On the bottom right, you see a doula with a client using a rebozo and sifting, kind of moving the baby into proper birthing position. So you can see this kind of here too, this intergenerational skill share. We see mother, daughter, kind of three generations here, ushering in this knowledge and this spirit of caregiving through this handcrafted object. This object here, which we have in the show, it's a Yakama cradle board from the Pacific Northwest. It is a third-generation matrilineal object, and what is so incredible about this is I think it really embodies the spirit of that intergenerational skill sharing in the object itself. So you can see each generation who, every expectant mother who receives the object is able to customize it. So you can see the kind of beads around the top of the cradle board are probably more mid-century, and then you see there's kind of like plastic seed beads that are from the 90s, and that Peter Rabbit fabric also from the 90s. So it becomes this kind of layered object of intergenerational knowledge. This, similarly, is a Sami Gietka, and these cradle board objects are also passed down through generations. Frederick Post and Inga Witkuria-Pave worked on this incredible project with the Norwegian Craft Council to restore an ancient Gietka, and they used ancestral notes that they found. They were doing a lot of research, family history and lineage research. They kind of did this experimental anthropology on their own family history. So they sourced tree trunks, carved them, sourced all of the, harvested all of the materials, wove the bands that were necessary to kind of make the object new for the next generation. So I think, there becomes this formal affinity between these kinds of practices, right? The skill sharing that's really essential to craft disciplines and the intergenerational knowledge sharing that happens in birthing spaces. So labor, not only, parturition, that kind of labor, but, the labor of being a parent, of caregiving, and the labor of being a craftsperson, and that kind of accretion of time and tracking. There's a massive affinity between motherhood and craft in this way. So there's an incredible document by Maria Elena Buzkek, who wrote Extraordinary Perspectives on Contemporary Craft, some of these kinds of really essential craft readers. And one of the artists that she interviews, Karen Reiner, says that labor is her medium. This is a fiber artist. And I think this is really the best way to describe craft to a new audience. The labor itself, the time investment, the kind of time honing your skill, your kind of affinity with your materials, all of those things are really so essential to the work, and more so than the final object. So something that I hear a lot in studio visits is, how long did that take to make? And some of my favorite answers are, it took 2 hours to throw it, took a couple weeks to dry, checking in on it, making sure that the conditions were perfect, few consecutive firings to get the glaze just right, a couple failures in there, and then, maybe 1,000 pots that I threw on the wheel that were failures before this final pot. And then before that, several generations of people teaching me and honing in on all of these glaze recipes and clay bodies to make sure that I now have all of the knowledge to make this pot. So that kind of accretion of time is what I'm talking about between craft and caregiving. I love these two pieces in the exhibition, Madeline Donahue's kind of parenting portraits, and then Francesca Fuchs' two monumental baby paintings of breastfeeding. And just thinking about the immense investment of time that it takes to be a caregiver or a parent, just breastfeeding for 1 year is about 1,800 hours. That's more than a full-time job and 3 weeks leave vacation. So it is a labor. It is an often underappreciated labor. And of course, there's this kind of historical connection between underappreciated or invisible labor in the domestic space, often associated with craft and caregiving. So I wanted to show a few ways through art history that this has been kind of bucked. So Mireille Lauderman Ukele's maintenance art tasks, she develops this manifesto, which I'll show on the next slide, but really in this kind of Duchampian way, kind of just says that the biggest work of her life is the maintenance of being a caregiver at this time. And by documenting it and presenting it in the art space, she kind of, underscores its value, and really, I think in a really brilliant way, equates labor and value and art. This is one of my favorite pieces. It's a poster for maintenance art and a proposition for her exhibition about care, 1969. Seeing objects like these, which were so kind of radical at the time, it feels like, they walked so that the artists in this exhibition could run. We have multi-generations of artists in this show, and the refrain I heard over and over again when I was interviewing these artists was from the kind of older generation of artists, nobody cared about this work. The exhibition itself, Designing Motherhood, was pitched to museums and everyone at first kind of said it was too niche. And it's funny, that refrain, this is too niche, this is just a women's issue. But when we reframe it, every museum visitor who is seeing any of these artworks was born. And so it really might be the most universal issue. So I think here seeing, care as the kind of thematic or, kind of curatorial underpinnings for a speculative show is a really beautiful example of this. Corinne May Botts' Milk Factory is another really incredible body of work that shows, kind of underscores the labor involved in caregiving. So, I have this quote here from Time magazine referencing this body of work, but, it's not cost-free, and in fact, beyond it being this kind of unappreciated form of labor, folks that are breastfeeding or have, we had an amazing tour here where that was led by the person who wrote the legislation that made breastfeeding in public in Texas legal in 1995. And that attorney was, really laid the foundation for kind of the developments that we're seeing in architecture spaces, infrastructure spaces, workplaces. That was the first kind of piece of legislation in this state that made other workplaces be required to have lactation rooms, for instance. So, we, on that tour, one woman who was a CEO at Merrill Lynch actually said that she was the first person to be, she was being complained about in HR, and she was the first one to request a specific breastfeeding and lactation space, and she said they only really recently have one. So we're really seeing the kind of depictions and representations of that kind of labor. This piece by Annie Liu, who has another work in our exhibition called Pumping, just has this motorized tube of breast milk that's just pumping in perpetuity, and kind of the mechanized proxy for parent who is, converting in this really masterful way the material of their body into a life-giving food source is, I think it's a really beautiful way to kind of meditate on that labor. This is a piece that we have in the exhibition by Annie Liu called Labor of Love, and it is a data sheet, a data visualization of every diaper feeding and breastfeeding session for the first 30 days of her son's life. And you can see each vial is filled with her own breast milk and diaper hydrogel, which is what makes diapers absorbent. And on one tour in this exhibition, I really love this this kind of closing lecture, because I've been able to reflect on the kind of arcs of the show, the feedback we've gotten. And on one tour, the visitors remarked that it was such a stark, formal aesthetic, that kind of data tracking, this kind of like really stark, minimal, kind of repetitive. It felt for them somewhat antithetical to what motherhood is, this kind of like messy, organic space. And what I have found, we had a doula group come just a few weeks later, and they said, this looks just like my my notebook of me tracking my kids' data. So here we're going to start, I'm going to show some examples of artists who are using this kind of formal data collection and data investigation way of presentation. So here we have Mary Kelly's postpartum document. And this was an incredible solo exhibition presented in 1979, I think ICA in London. And you can see here she is documenting everything that her child ate, and then analyzing the kind of fecal matter from their diaper. And this is a massive series of objects, so you can see kind of along the walls. And then her diaries of, frustrations with her child, and then you can see her own. It became a collaborative piece when her own child was drawing on top of the document. So she presented it in its final presentation as a book, but I think this kind of mode of tracking slowness, understanding, having a deep understanding of material is really present in this work. Similarly, we have Corey Ackelmeyer, whose length of 5 years chain each is on view in the exhibition. And each chain in this piece represents one day of her little over 5-year-old child's life. And you can see here a scan of her notebook, and kind of getting into a lens into the mind of a craft artist. The kind of meticulousness, almost neurotic monitoring of everything from how much material it is, how long it is, what does the material represent, what kind of material should I solder it with? So you can see it's silver chain soldered with gold, and in that kind of nest of accretion, and you can see them all gathered together, it kind of has that emanation of gold. This is really, really common when I'm in craft artist studios, this kind of meticulous investigation of material. Here we have Sung Lee's sleep blanket, and each stitch in this, it's 365 days of sleep data from his first child that he converted into a knitting pattern. So each stitch represents 6 minutes of time, and you can see the sleeping is the gray. You can see here he collected this data with the Baby Connect app, and then built this kind of, which you can see on the right, what that looks like. And this kind of obsessive monitoring of that is so inherent to caregiving practices now. He really deftly kind of communicates that in a craft material, which you can see here. This is his weaving, his knitting pattern that he's kind of mocking up in a weaving app. So I wanted to show this kind of deep material research and artist-based research that is really central to craft practice across media. So here we have natural dye tests on different kinds of woven materials. Here we have glaze tiles, and I actually came across, so Glazy is a forum for ceramic artists to share glaze recipes. And you can see here some of the first recipes that were posted in this kind of crowdsourced forum. And one of the community topic-based posts was, how do you display your test tiles? How creative are you with your test tiles? Because it's such an important part of the practice. Each clay body is different. Each kind of glaze composition reacts differently. And you can see this kind of obsessive monitoring of all of those material interactions. And I want to take a case study here to talk about glass. And glass recipes were really, really secretive historically, unlike ceramic, the ceramic community, who is sharing their best lava glaze and their best runny, amazing glaze that everybody on Instagram liked. Glass artists were very, very secretive about their glass recipes. So one of the most well-known glass recipes that we are still trying to recreate is ruby glass, which is this gorgeous kind of glowing glass. It was also used to recreate gemstones in early Europe, and it's made by putting gold into the glass recipe. The last person who successfully made ruby glass destroyed the glass recipe before he died. And Werner Herzog famously made this film called Heart of Glass, where this town that loses the recipe is obsessively, kind of manically trying to recover that knowledge. And I think a really great case study is for this kind of making as knowing, learning by doing, is this project that was at RISD. They had a couple of historians who study ruby glass come work with them and try to do this kind of experimental archaeology, really, of testing different techniques and seeing if they could recover with the recipes that they could find a recipe for ruby glass that was successful. So you can see they documented each stage of the process, and I don't think it was actually successful after all of these trials anyway, but again, you can see this kind of obsessive material cultivation that's really important to craft. Another project is Atelier NL, who crowdsourced regionally specific silica, sand from all over the world, and this kind of wild sand they tried to make efficacious glass. So not all silica is able to be made into glass. Sometimes it's incompatible, and it will, these kind of little ceramic pots will just blow up in the kiln. So these were the most successful of their wild sand tests. And you can see the way that they are testing the silica and kind of tracking it regionally over, these maps as well. And then the final body of work, which they were able to blow with that silica from those regions. So this kind of presentation, I'm trying to really show is so deeply part of craft, is so deeply a part of the kind of process, praxis of making and knowing. And that material intelligence, I think you can really see the formal affinity now between works from Mary Kelly, Annie Liu, and those kinds of glass recipe experiments that I was showing you. So to that visitor who came in and said, why motherhood doesn't look like this? I think both motherhood and craft really do look like this. And something that I also find so incredible, and this refrain I heard over and over again chatting with the artists, is that, craft is really the skilled transformation of raw materials. You're kind of birthing creations through this kind of skilled manipulation of material. And what's happening in parenting, motherhood, birth is similarly this kind of skilled, almost mystical transformation. So you can see on the left, Alison Kearney Moses's belly, but really just thinking about the kind of intrinsic shifts, material shifts in the body, everything from hormones to body shapes to, the womb, which is perfectly crafted to kind of support human life. And then after that, we see the body is again kind of skillfully converting itself into a food source. And in this piece on the right, Celestial Body Beads, Amy has dried her own breast milk. It became a powder that she set into resin. And I think in this prayer bead presentation, she's really trying to, especially in a craft context, is really trying to make us think about the value of materials, right? Some of the most valuable materials in jewelry, are not resin and breast milk, but here, she's trying to posit that it's ephemeral, it's life-giving, maybe it's the most valuable material. And this other kind of inherent connection between materiality, craft, and parenthood, I think, is the connection to the body. Not only embodied knowledge and embodied making practices, but also bodies of material. So in ceramic discourse, we always call clay bodies, different kinds of clay compositions with different grits. And so seeing something like this piece, which is by Jen Ricotta, who is both a midwife and potter, who is showing cervical dilation in clay on the wheel, I think is particularly resonant. Seeing it in a clay body, really, I think there's this very interesting connection between the materials in craft and the human body. And to kind of close out this conversation, and we'll shift into questions, but I want to talk a little bit about the carrier bag theory of human technological history. And so this exhibition really started as an examination of iterative designs over the course of history. And that storytelling really began with Western medicine and a lot of really fraught interventions into the birthing space. And I think there's this severing of that kind of ancestral knowledge that we've talked about in this lecture so far, and that craft knowledge that was really supporting all of those reproductive experiences before that. And I think, when I take them to the speculum area of the show or the IUD area of the show, everyone says that it looks like torture devices. Why would anybody invent, this curly piece of copper with a spring? And, how did that design come to be? All of those things. And I think, in the attempt to merge craft with this storytelling, it's really trying to sew back up the severing of those two kinds of knowledge. And I think it's really problematizing the way we talk about technology, and kind of the root words of technology, techno, logic. It's really leaving out and excluding all of these other kinds of making, knowing, doing, right, that we've been talking about. It's really prioritizing kind of newness, innovation, all of these other kind of scientific coded disciplines. And what I think is so interesting about this theory is that this anthropologist is proposing that really most likely the first cultural device and technology developed by humans was probably a container, like a bag or a net, rather than a weapon. We always see these kind of flint-napped bones or, pieces of obsidian, and that's really codified in our minds as the first kind of technologies that humans have made. And I think this allows us to talk about a really much more expansive and collective way of talking about material culture and technology in practice. So here we have on the right Anne Moore with her Snuggly invention. And, the first room in the exhibition is really devoted to baby carrying and baby delivery and all of these objects that kind of support that mediated space between womb and world. And I love to think about all of these kinds of vessels as containers or bags or, so much of parenting is carrying like 5 types of bags from what I've seen. And this kind of containment and thinking about this as a really fundamental and formative kind of human technology, I think is also really beautifully demonstrated in these pieces, which are the earliest archaeological record we have of human bottle feeding. So these are baby bottles from the Bronze and Iron Age on the top. And we can see these were the kind of formal inspirations for the mold-blown glass pieces by Sarah Hubbs that are also in the show. So kind of ending with thinking about the collective. Collectives are so deeply important to craft and the history of craft. And they are also so important to the kind of ways that people have organized around reproductive justice and access and design, really. So we have, Our Bodies Ourselves, which was a self-published kind of, almost zine-like skill sharing by the Boston Public Health Collective, and it's still going. They, continually re-meet, and all that really started as women just sharing all of these documents that they found helpful. It was really this crowdsourced skill sharing document. And then on the left, we have the Art Sit, which was developed by the Home Affairs Collective. This collective of artists who is really concerned with the kind of material culture that support parents in art spaces. So here we have, a prototype for a museum stroller that, allows parents to, have more ease when bringing their kids into museums, but also that perspective shift allows the kids to, more genuinely connect with the work on the walls. And I wanted to kind of close our conversation by highlighting Liz LaFleur, who is here with us. Right here, hi. And this Queer Birth Project ongoing work that is made in collaboration with Catherine Sobering. They're 2 UNT professors. Liz is the artist part of the duo, and Katie is the sociologist. And it's really taking inspiration from Judy Chicago's Birth Project, which has, been this incredible community-based project working with textile artists from across the nation, needle workers, and really trying to kind of reinsert feminine stories and perspectives into our origin stories and our historical art historical record. And this project is really based on conducting oral histories, meeting with queer families across the country, and taking that kind of data and transforming it into these different threads of work, of which there's on bodies, on kinship, and it's a really kind of radical, it's a radical interdisciplinary model that's actually weaving together all of these kinds of community-based inputs. So on that note, I want to ask all of you, how efficacious was this persuasive kind of call? I hope that it's made you think about motherhood, caregiving, craft, maybe in a different way. And Liz and myself are here for questions. We are available in the galleries, but I'm going to open it up now for questions. Anyone? Any burning questions? It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment, a riddle, a story. Linda Shearer.
I actually have 2 questions. One is, has there been any studies of the children, yours is too young, who went through some kind of one of these processes and how it impacted them in some way, psychologically or mostly psychologically. And my second question is, what would you say was the biggest surprise for you in terms of putting the exhibition together?
Great questions. Thank you, Linda. Well, to start, I'm not sure that I have encountered any kind of like firsthand, people talking about what their experiences have been like, kind of the children, artists and children collaborators that we've talked about. But, surprises that I encountered, I think it started as a pretty naive investigation of material culture, and the ways in which kind of the hand and craftspeople were maybe left out of this story. And what I found is that it's really actually deeply essential to the story. And I think that was actually a big surprise. I was hoping that I would, come find some and discover something really meaty like that. But I think that I was kind of positing this question to myself, and through the research and through talking to artists, I think I became more and more convinced that that craftsmanship and art making are really analog disciplines. Other surprises? Other questions? Does anybody else know of artist and child collaborator updates?
Your friend's kids using the art sit and how that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Okay. That's actually a great example. So the art sit piece, it was premiered at the Queen's Museum, and the first prototype, they were testing it, kind of talking to parents and kids about what was working, what wasn't. We got the second version of the prototype, and we've been able to test it in our galleries every Saturday. And I thought it might be a little bit of a gimmick, it's just a museum stroller that has like a cute thing that kids can put their hands on. It has like a little horse head. But the real efficacy of that work is that most of the exhibitions that I put on, I'm not thinking about half of our population, all of the kiddos that come through. And they were suddenly a part of the conversation. I think before that, it was inaccessible to them. The content was inaccessible to them. Most of the works in museums are hung between 58 and 60 inches high. And so I think what I perceived as, maybe they're just too young for this content, maybe it doesn't interest them, was absolutely incorrect. We had a kid who's kind of just like wailing in the middle of the floor on this kids mat that we had. As soon as we put him into the art sit, he was like, take me to this, I'm part of, take me to the neon bellies, I'm part of the conversation. Other questions?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
So I recently became a mother, and my daughter is 4 months old, and it's funny, my husband said that I took my pregnancy, and to him it seemed like it was now my hobby, and I did everything that I could to learn about pregnancy, and I had been consciously conceiving this birth for a long time, and but just to immerse myself in that world and meeting a ton of people that work in the birth world, which I had never entered before, was this birth world, and I've made some wonderful friends. One's with me here, she's a midwife here, and wow, I was able to actually manifest the birth of my dreams. I was able to have a home birth unmedicated, and it's been really powerful to get to know some of the things that you even showed here, like the rebozo. My background is Mexican, and I was introduced to the rebozo, while being pregnant, and I did actually use it in my birth, which was pretty cool to see. You have a picture of actually the way that we ended up using it. And, I'm surprised that there wasn't something maybe more about the placenta. I ended up encapsulating my placenta, but before I did that, the person who did that for me, she created an art piece with it. And I have yet to frame it, but it's basically just the shape of my placenta with the natural blood that was on it already. She didn't put any paint or anything on it. So things like that have just been really eye-opening for me, and I'm so glad you put this together, because it's, what I'm so into right now is just learning more about motherhood, and I do agree it is a craft. But it's also like the collective, right? You have to have that to like really, really explore this area. So I'm just so happy that you put this together.
Thank you for telling me about that. The rebozo is I think the most amazing object. I keep using that as the segue object that I talk about in all of the shows. And another surprise that I came across in the research was that the number one recommended kind of intervention for maternal and infant mortality to combat mortality rates globally is to just create more pathways for midwives. So thank you for, just major kind of awe of the birth workers in this space. So thank you so much, everybody. Any other thoughts? Thank you. Come find us in the galleries. We'd love to chat with you. And thanks again for being here. Happy Saturday.